In today's note, we're going to look at volume and surface area of a cylinder. So we're going to start off by trying to develop a formula for the surface area of a cylinder. Again, you could go right to the formula sheet and look for it, but we're just going to break down how we kind of come up with it. So we're going to start off, again, the surface area is the amount of space the two-dimensional object takes up. So if we were to fold this or unfold it into a net, again, remember this is our 3D object and this is our 2D net or two-dimensional net. So if we were to unfold it and lay it flat, this is what it would look like. And the amount of space that this takes up is our surface area. So we can see we have multiple shapes. We have two circles and we have a rectangle. So I need to figure out the area of a circle first, and if we go to our formula page or remember back to grade 9, we can see that the area of a circle is equal to pi r squared. And just off to the side, remember that pi is basically 3.14. So just that we remember that. So pi is 3.14 basically. If you want, you can use the pi button on your calculator. That will give you a lot more decimal places because pi again is infinite basically. So again, just keep that in mind. You can use 3.14 as well. So that's the area of our circle. The area of our rectangle is going to be a little bit different. So we do have a couple measurements here. Right, we have our height of our rectangle of our cylinder, and we have our radius. So we know that a rectangle is length times width. I can say that one of those measurements is going to equal the height, because again, we should know the height of our cylinder. So the difference now is going to be our length. But what we should see, and this is easier to see on the three-dimensional object, and I'll highlight it in red, if I were to draw a circle around that, and if I were to cut this or unfold this however I want, basically everything that I circled in red is going to be this measurement here, because this rectangle has to wrap all the way around and basically cover each part of the circle or wrap around that circle. So if we know this distance in red for the circle, we should be able to then figure out what this red distance is. And if we look at our formula sheet, we know that circumference, or the perimeter or the distance around a circle, is 2 times pi times r. So what we have in red here is our circumference. Let me rewrite that. That's our circumference, which is basically the same thing that we see in red. So this length of our rectangle is actually the circumference of the circle that's at the top and the bottom. So that means that the area of a rectangle is our height multiplied by the circumference, which we get from our formula sheet. We see at the bottom here on the right is 2 times pi times r. So that is the height of our rectangle. So if we want to find our surface area or the total area, we have to do our circles, and we have 2 of them. So 2 times pi times r squared, or it's basically just 2 times the area of one circle, plus the area of the rectangle, so h, which is multiplied by, actually let me just rewrite this, let me simplify it over here. The area of the rectangle is 2 times pi times r times h, just to simplify that all together, so that we have 2 pi r h. So this right here is our surface area, and if we look at the formula sheet, we have, again, on the bottom here at the right, we see our cylinder, we see our surface area in the first column, 2 pi r squared, which we have, plus 2 pi r h, which we also have. So we are able to get the same formula as the formula sheet. So what we're going to do is just determine the volume and surface area of the cylinder. So we're going to do 2 here, and we're going to use our formula sheet to help us through this. So the surface area, or just of our cylinder, we got, again, from the formula either above or our formula sheet, 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi r h. We have our measurements here. So again, our radius, or our r, from the center of the circle out, and our height of the cylinder. And so now we're just plugging information in. So 2 times pi times r squared, so 6 squared, plus 2 times pi times 6 times 18. Now you could do this all at once on the calculator. I'm going to break it up into different parts. That way, if you're following along, you can see kind of what each part is, so you can check your answers. So the first part, we should get 226.2. We'll round it. Again, I'm just using the pi button. I'm not using 3.14, so you might vary by a decimal or two. And then 2 times pi times 6 times 18, we get 678.6, rounding again. And when I add these two together, I get 904.8. And my units, it's centimeters, and because again it's surface area, it's centimeters squared. So again, remember, surface area is squared units, volume is cubed units. So that is our surface area of the cylinder. Let's look at the volume now. So the volume, and we'll go back over to our surface area our formula sheet on the right here. Cylinder is at the top. We'll scroll over to the volume area. We have pi r squared times h, or basically the area of the base times the height. And you will notice for a lot of these volumes, or for a lot of these 3D objects, the volume is going to be roughly the same general formula. The area of the base times the height. So basically, and the way that is basically if I take the area of the base, or this circle here, and I stack very small circles on top of each other all the way up, or the entire length of the height, that's basically where my volume's coming from. So it's like adding a slice of paper all the way up until you get it up, and then calculating how much area of that paper you actually had in total. But anyways, we have our formula here. We have our r and our h from the diagram, so we're just going to plug our information in and solve. So pi times r squared, so 6 squared, times h, which is 18. And again, this is just a one-step calculation. So pi times 6 squared. Again, make sure it's just 6 squared. Remember your bed mass, you have to do brackets, then exponents. So it's 6 to the power of 2 only. It's not pi times 6 and then to the power of 2. And we should get a final number of 2034.72. And we are dealing with centimeters, and because it's volume, it is centimeters cubed. So that is the volume of our cylinder. So again, volume's a little bit more straightforward. We just plug in our numbers and we solve and we calculate. So for example 3, this one's going to be a little bit different. This is going to require some of our kind of problem solving and equation solving solutions. So we have a volume of a cylinder is 785.4 centimeters cubed. The radius is 5 centimeters. What is the height? So we've done questions similar to this before with solving equations. So what we're going to do, just to help us visualize it, I'm going to roughly draw my cylinder. Again, you don't have to be great at art for it. We know that the radius from the center out is 5. We don't know what the height is. And we know that the volume is equal to 785.4. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off with our volume formula, which is pi times r squared times h. And we're going to fill in as much information as we know. Right? So actually I'll write that over here, or up at the top, step 1. Fill in as much information as you can. That's our first step. So we know our volume is 785.4. We know pi, I'm just going to leave it as the symbol. And we know r squared is, or r is 5. So it's 5 squared times h. The next step, or number 2, is we're going to simplify. So we're going to do any calculations that we can without rearranging or moving things. So 785.4 is going to stay the same, but I can do this multiplication first. So I can multiply pi times 5 squared, and I would get 78.5, and then the h is still there. Right, so basically what we've just done is this kind of gets broken apart into pi times 5 squared times h. I just simplified these two parts first, 78.5, and it was still multiplied by h. So all I did was I multiplied the first two numbers, and I didn't multiply by h because I don't have that number yet, which is perfectly okay. So after we simplify, the next step, or 3, is solve for the unknown. And this is where the information, or this is where the solving equations from the last unit, or not the last unit, from one of the first units is helpful. So if I want to get h by itself, I need to get rid of this multiplied by 78.5. So I'm going to divide, or do the opposite. One side cancels out. I have to do the same thing to the other side to balance it out. And if I do that, I get rounding basically a height of 10. And it's more specifically, because it is just one side or one unit, it's just 10 centimeters. So the height is 10 centimeters. For B, B is the same idea, except now we're solving for a different measurement. So we're still dealing with a cylinder, so I'm just going to draw roughly my cylinder here. I know that the I don't know what the radius is, but I do know that it would be here. I know that the height is 4 feet here. And I know that the volume is 28.3. So I'm going to start with my volume formula. It's the only one I can use because that's all I'm given. So pi r squared times h. Step 1, fill in as much information as you can. I know my volume, so 28.3 equals pi r squared times h, which I know is 4. Here I'm going to simplify. So what I'm going to do, and I'll show you how I'm breaking this apart. If I have pi times r squared times 4, it doesn't matter what order I multiply these in, the answer is still going to be the same. So I can actually multiply or switch this around so that it's pi times 4 times r squared, and it won't matter, it'll still give me the same thing. And similar to the last one, I can focus on multiplying pi times 4. And get 12.6. And then still have the r squared there at the end because I can't multiply that through. So I get 28.3 equals 12.6 r squared. Now I want to solve for my unknown. So I want to get r squared by itself. Since I'm multiplying by 12.6, I'm going to divide by 12.6. So I'm going to divide both sides by that. It'll cancel out on one side. 28.3 divided by 12.6, I get 2.25 equals r squared. And now I want to get r by itself, so I have to square root to get rid of that squared. So the square root of 2.25, so very similar to the Pythagorean theorem that we did, equals r. And we should get 1.5, which is equal to r. And because we know our measurements, sorry, 1.5, it's only one measurement, it's not volume, so 1.5 feet. Let me just write that out a little bit neater. 1.5 feet is equal to my radius. So I found my radius. So again, that's just a different kind of method. If we're given some information, can we find a missing piece? Similar to what we've done before in taking and using the solving equations methods that we had used in previous units. But again, if you're trying to find the surface area and volume, we have these formula sheets over to the side. So it's just making sure you can plug in the right information and then solve correctly.